to tonight's presentation of Queer Catholic Faith, Dignity USA's new video conference series, in which we invite members of the LGBT and allied Catholic community to share our perspective on faith and spirituality, and, we hope, to make dialogue about how we live Catholicism more normative in our community. I'm Marianne Duddy-Burke, Executive Director of Dignity USA, and I'd like to thank the Dignity USA Board of Directors for its support of this new program, and Dignity USA staff members Jim Smith and Logan Baer for all of their creativity, planning, and technical expertise that has made this and future Queer Catholic Faith events a reality. I'm also really grateful to all of you for your participation in this event tonight. At this point, it looks like we have people logging in from all over the country, which is terrific, and we know that people are watching as individuals, as couples, as groups of friends, and in Boston, we have the Women and Men Spirituality Group gathered together, so special welcome to all of you. It's really wonderful to have each of you here tonight. Some participants have probably been part of several webinars in the past, but we are aware that for some of you this is a new experience. So thanks for being adventurous. I'd like to run over some technical tips for you, and then I'll give you a brief orientation to how tonight's event is going to unfold. First, during our video conference, you will see either one or two, and very briefly, 3 people on camera. If any of us is too loud or too soft, move your cursor underneath the picture of the person who's speaking, and you can lower or raise the volume for that individual. You can also control the volume on your own computer or your headset if you're using one. If you hear an echo, adjusting the volume generally deals with that problem. During the video conference, there will be opportunities, like what Logan just flashed up a moment ago, to participate in polls that will appear on the box to the side of the speaker. To vote, simply click on the appropriate answer, like what is your favorite color? Or are you a member of Dignity USA? And your answer will instantly register. I do want to let you know that if you are viewing as a couple or a family or a group, only one click is going to register, so that if people, if somebody else registers from the same login, the first answer will be canceled out. So decide on an appropriate answer. So tonight, we welcome your active participation in Queer Catholic Faith. While only those designated as presenters will be seen and heard on camera, everyone is welcome to use the chat box below the main panel to submit comments and questions for our presenters, or to ask our technical staff for assistance. After our presenters have chatted for about 30 minutes or so, we'll turn to the questions and comments that you have submitted. So if you'd like to ask Jamie a question, just type it into the chat box that appears in the lower part of your screen, and we'll get to it towards the latter third of our session. Occasionally, a presenter's screen may freeze for a few moments. If this happens, it can throw off the timing of the sound for some participants. So if this occurs, we have asked our presenter to log out and log back in, which is a very quick process. I hope that I'm giving you this information unnecessarily, but it's best to be prepared if it does happen. and it'll just be a brief interruption in the program, and then the presenter will be back and we'll pick up where we left off. And one final technical note. If you are running programs other than this web conference, you're more likely to experience interruptions in sound or video transmission. So you may want to take a moment to shut down any programs other than this program right now. So thanks for bearing with me for all of the technical mumbo jumbo. And now it is my true honor to introduce tonight's faith-sharing conversation. This evening, Dignity USA Program Manager Jim Smith, who works with us in Minneapolis, Minnesota, has graciously agreed to conduct this interview. Jim is responsible for inviting and orienting the speakers for Queer Catholic Faith. And when he, Jamie, and I met this weekend in Maryland to discuss tonight's event, it was clear that they had already developed a wonderful bond and comfort with each other. So it's a pleasure to introduce Jim Smith to all of you. Jim, do you want to pop up?
Hey, everyone.
Hi, Jim.
Nice to be here with you. Thanks for joining this conversation.
And our very special guest tonight is a woman of courage, creativity, and clarity. Many of you are likely familiar with her superb writing about contemporary Catholicism, which appears in the National Catholic Reporter and NCR Online. Graduate of Yale Divinity School, Jamie has directed social justice ministry programs in 2 New York City churches and is a regular homilist for Dignity New York. There is much, much more that I could say about this wonderful Catholic lesbian, but for now, let me just welcome, with great pleasure, Jamie Manson, and thank her for sharing her sense of queer Catholic faith with us tonight. So let's let Jamie and Jim begin this conversation. Welcome, Jamie.
Hello. Thank you so much, Marianne, for that warm introduction.
Marianne, thank you so much. And we'll be seeing her again at the end of the hour. So, Jamie, and to participants, this conversation is not so much around the issues that are confronting us as people of faith and as queer Catholics. It's primarily a kind of look into a pretty remarkable person's life, Jamie, and how her own spirituality and her faith and the stories of her life brought her to this point and intersect with the work that she does. So, Jamie, I'm curious, given the fact that you're a woman in the church, that you're gay, that you're young, at least a lot younger than me, not a real cool combination to be also then connected to the Roman Catholic institution. So I want to ask you how you got here in the first place. So can you tell us a little bit about how you stepped into church life in your youth? Did you grow up in a devout Catholic family, or were you somehow drawn on your own?
Thank you again. Thank you, Jim, for that introduction. Yeah, wow. It is a story, and I didn't even realize how much of a story it was until you and I spoke in Maryland. I did not actually grow up in a very Catholic family. We were, I guess, culturally Catholic. I grew up, I'm the grandchild of Italian immigrants on my mother's side. And my grandparents, my great-grandparents, interestingly enough, they were both shepherds in Italy. And my great-grandmother, her deepest desire was to be a nun. But her family was so poor that she had to work, and so she worked as a shepherd. And when they immigrated, she had to get married, she had children, and when they immigrated to America, she being very devout, started to go to church, of course, in the United States. And being so poor, she couldn't give a lot of money to the church. So as she was leaving one day after her devotion, she put a penny into the poor box. And that for her, that was truly the widow's mite, that gospel story where that was giving a significant amount of money for her. And she was scolded by the priest, and she was told, that she did not put enough money in there. And from that day, and this is a very devout woman in the 1920s, she said, I will not go back to church. I will create my own shrine. I will create my own church in my home. And that's what she did. And she did daily devotions. And I grew up in some ways, my grandparents inherited that. Because I remember them doing their devotions growing up. My grandfather had his book with Our Lady. My grandmother taught me the rosary. She did the rosary every night. But they didn't really go to Mass. I mean, my mother, her sisters, they all made their sacraments, obviously, and they went to church because that's what you did. But I wouldn't say we were like a serious church-going family. So I did not grow up in what would be a typically devout Catholic family. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Did you, when did you start going to church, and when did you start kind of being drawn to, and what was it about church that you were drawn into when you were a girl or a teenager?
I did just like everybody else. I made my sacraments, we went, ashes and palms and all of that. And when I was in the 7th grade, I was in public school all of my childhood. And my mother decided to put me in Catholic school because we had moved to another part of Long Island. And she wasn't as happy with the public school, so she put me into Catholic school. And I started to really enjoy going to Mass. We had to go to Mass, and I actually liked it. I can't exactly say why. But what I do remember is my first Holy Thursday liturgy. I'm sure everyone that's listening knows that liturgy. And not only is there a washing of the feet, but at the very end, the altar is stripped, and the priest, changes clothes, and they take all the Eucharist that's left, and they process around the church, and they sing a very, very ancient hymn called Pange Lingua, and they process around the church. And I remember that moment. There was a lot of incense. And it's a particularly intense moment in the liturgy of the year. And I remember having this experience of feeling very, very afraid, but at the same time very, very intrigued and riveted. I felt a little, maybe, I don't know, like when you're afraid or something very intense happens and you tremble a bit. And I did not know what that experience was, but I remembered it, and I remember feeling at that moment that God was calling me to something. I didn't quite know what, but I felt it was an irresistible attraction to the Eucharist. And it was, I didn't have a vision, I didn't levitate, it wasn't anything terribly exciting. But, many, many years later, when I was an undergrad, as I was studying theology, I had a professor who taught us about this sociologist of religion named Rudolf Otto, who said the holy is he said it in Latin, mysterium tremendum et fascinans. And basically what that means, it's almost, you can sound it out, is it's a mysterious experience that almost makes you tremble, but also absolutely fascinates you. And the moment I heard that, I went back 10 years. Actually, it wasn't even 10 years. It was probably 7 years. And I was in that moment again, and I said, my goodness, I think I might have experienced the holy. So, yeah, that was the initial initiation, so to speak, or calling.
Yeah, powerful experience.
Yeah.
These days, do you, in your experience with queer Catholics and straight Catholics, ally Catholics, in your experience of worship, is there something of that mystery in the sacramental life that you experience that still draws you in, that still smells of the holy?
I think that I have certainly seen it. I have felt it. One vivid memory I have, I was still working in a Catholic parish in New York at the time, and I was in charge of the RCIA, the Rite of Christian Initiation of Adults. And Interestingly, we had a number of gay men who were wanting to become Catholic, openly gay men, partnered men, but also felt this mysterious attraction to Catholicism, and it was an honor to walk with them through that. And I do remember one moment when, at the Easter Vigil, when several candidates were being received, and I remember that experience, and I could see actually some of the men experiencing it. And what was so interesting about that was that so many people were entering RCIA because they wanted to get married in the church and they hadn't received confirmation, or they had never received a Eucharist, or they weren't Catholic, but they wanted to, they were marrying a Catholic. And these gay men were in it because they really desired something about the Catholic tradition. And they knew full well the church's teaching on homosexuality. And they had found the one parish in New York where they could be accepted without judgment. But there was such an authenticity to their calling to be Catholic, and I think I sensed that. I experience the sacrament of the holy really more now, believe it or not, outside the walls of the church. I certainly, I've written about my experiences with the homeless, with the stranger, with welcoming people. I certainly, so I'm opening, I'm broadening more and more where I see the holy at work in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say I'm having most of my experiences really in the world now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. You mentioned in our conversation the other day that your father sort of plays a part in your sort of connection with the church and your connection with faith. Can you say a little bit about that?
Definitely, yeah. Interestingly, and I hope there are therapists out there that want to analyze this, social workers. Interestingly, around the time I had that experience at the age of 13, when I was in Catholic grammar school and having that Holy Thursday experience, around that time my father, my parents divorced when I was about 3, so he wasn't a consistent presence in my life, but when I was 12 or 13, he left and he moved to Arizona. And I didn't hear from him very much after he left. And so what I noticed in my initial interactions with the church was that it was also feeding a need for some sort of father, some sort of authority figure. I definitely felt a connection with the priests in that I wanted them to fill that role in my life somehow of a fathering presence. And it took me many, many years to really discern what was, my calling, what was that initial calling, and what was me pursuing ultimately a father that would not accept me. And what I mean by that is I interpreted that calling early on to be a calling to the priesthood, and I still do. My notion of what priesthood is has expanded, and we can talk about that later. But I really thought I wanted to be a Roman Catholic cleric as we know them today, and even went to the vocations office of our diocese, which on Long Island here, a diocese of Rockville Center, is not exactly a hotbed of liberalism. And went and discerned this with the vocations director, and talked for an hour. I was bearing my soul, and he said very little. He yawned more than he said, and at the very end, handed me this remarkable magazine with all of these little postcard tear-outs that I could send to different orders of nuns. And I didn't want to be a nun, and I had made that pretty explicit, but obviously what else could they do with me? And, it was a defining moment for me, because I look back on it and I say, why did I pursue something that I knew would reject me, And, and in some ways I've wondered to what extent, my unavailable father was also, and pursuing that was also me pursuing another unavailable type of father figure, that ultimately would reject me, and I knew that. And we have so many people in our culture pursue unavailable people, emotionally unavailable people. I definitely fell into that very, very painful way of being in the world for many years, and I always wondered to what extent was this, me, what was neurotic, what was I neurotically pursuing the church, trying to fulfill some deeper need in me, and what actually was me pursuing an authentic calling. And it's taken years to discern that and to take those things apart. But it's been very, very important for me, not wanting ordination as a way to be validated, by this male authority. So it's very important part of my my growth.
It strikes me, regardless of whether you were, your movement in the church was your being drawn to something or a reality that wasn't real available to me. It strikes me that people like you who serve the church from your corner make church accessible to a lot of folk. You're being present, you're being vocal, you're offering your voice in the ways that you do. I think it gives me the image of these huge open arms to folks who feel on the edge. And you validate the fact that they are, in fact, living their Christianity. They are, in fact, Catholic, in one sense of the term, to the core. So, though you may have found some in your life and in the church to be unavailable, I think you offer that availability to others.
Thank you.
Robert has a question, going back to your experience on Holy Thursday. And he asks, let me just bring it up here, was that a uniquely Catholic sort of sacramental experience for you, or was it not so much that, but a personal experience with God?
Oh, Robert, I know Robert well, so thank you for the question. Yeah, of course. Yeah, he's part of the Dignity Young Adult group in New York, that amazing group of young folks. I think, I don't know if I can separate the two. That's a tough question, Robert. And no one's ever posed it to me, and I've never really thought about it. I think when it happened, I didn't even know what sacramental meant. I don't even think I didn't know what sacramental really meant until actually I got to Protestant divinity school. That's the irony of my life, as I grew up Catholic in a very Catholic worldview, here in New York on Long Island. And it wasn't until I was surrounded by 40 different types of Protestants in school that I started to see, that Catholics do the Catholic, we call it the Catholic imagination, or my mentor, Margaret Farley, called it the Catholic sacramental view of the world. That as Catholics, it's part of our theological tradition, whether we're directly taught it or not, that all things in nature, all things in the world are capable of revealing God to us. And that was a very important moment when I learned that, and it took getting out of the Catholic world to learn that. What was uniquely, I think, really beautiful about Catholicism, something really worth holding on to, even if you're upset by the institutional church, because you have this very, as a Catholic, dynamic relationship with God, where God is always trying to break through to you, and all the things in nature, whether it's a work of art or a piece of music or the ocean or a rosary bead or holy water or fire or all of these great symbols. So I think that my experience could have happened to anyone, because I think unlike the Roman Catholic institution, never want to place limits on how God can work in the world and who God can touch and how God can become present. But for me, it was... it was an entry into what sacrament meant. But as I say, what I've come to learn is that sacrament can really happen anywhere. It really can, anywhere in nature. So was it uniquely Catholic? Insofar as it was the Eucharist that was happening, yes. But do I think that experience could happen to anyone personally? Yes. Yes, but I'm glad for the Catholic tradition to give me language to understand it. Even though Rudolf Otto, who said Mysterium Tremendum, was not Catholic, he was actually Protestant. But I got that language. So,
Jamie, I recognize that as I read your last article in NCR Online about Barbara Johnson and her denial, the priest denying her communion, your beautiful reflection on that in your latest column. I also read a lot of the comments, and there were a couple hundred comments to your article, and I would say 70% of them were, folks who differed strongly with you, and that's got to be a tough world to live in, to stand up as you do and to speak out as you do, to speak the truth as you have discerned it. There's a cost, and how have you experienced that cost?
In a number of ways. One of them is definitely the NCR comments section. That's a cost which I actually I don't even read very often anymore. I have someone else read them for me and then give me the news. And I know there are a number of NCR writers who go through that as well. And I mean, part of it is that, it's evidence of, we all know that, probably the number of highly Orthodox Catholics is pretty small, but they are very, very vocal. And part of what energizes them is that they have an absolute view of the world. Their world is absolutely black and white, who's in, who's out, where God can be and where God can't be. And when you need to cling to that rigid way of seeing the world, you get particularly mobilized, to shout down anyone that might disagree with you. And to me, that's profoundly sad, because you exclude so many opportunities to encounter God. So that's one of them. Certainly in terms of my employment, it has been very, very hard. It surprised me how many people don't believe this, but if you're an out lesbian who's in a relationship particularly, and if you are openly in favor of women's ordination, you cannot get work in the Roman Catholic Church. And that's just it. There's really no play in the line for that. So I have a Master of Divinity degree. I love ministry. I'm very well suited to Catholic ministry because I believe in the theological tradition and the social justice tradition. But nevertheless, there is no place that will welcome me to work, unfortunately. So there's been a great employment cost. There's also a cost, and there are other speakers who experience this too. You get disinvited from things very often. When I was first writing, I was writing a lot on young adults. People were really appreciating what I was saying about young adult Catholics and the future of the church. And they were inviting me to all of these different, talk here, write a book for us. And then they come to find out eventually that I'm openly gay. I'm very publicly in favor of women's ordination. And it was immediately, the invitations would just vanish. And some folks were very honest about it, that, you're gay. And so there was one Catholic publisher said, you know what, we didn't realize you're openly gay. So you can't write for us. I'm so sorry. And there are other people who said, when the person we invited 2 months ago who said no has said yes, so we're sorry, but we'll be in touch later. And of course, no one's ever been in touch. Theology's on Tap. I have to laugh when they contact me because that's geared toward young adults. And they invite me, Theology's on Tap, and I say, it's not going to happen. No. Our bishop is liberal. Our bishop reads you. And of course, I never hear from them. So there is a great cost because it's narrower and narrower group that you can speak to. But as I've written before, as the title of my column says, I believe very strongly in ministry to the margins, and I believe the margins are a holy place. So for me, it's not about the numbers. It is painful.
With that in mind, has your own your own personal discernment of what you're called to, of your own vocation, has that changed at all, or is that changing in the last few years as you have experienced some of this shutting out?
It has. I was someone who years ago would have said, yes, I want to be ordained, absolutely. And then, seeing, and I saw this not only in the Roman Catholic Church, but I saw this, obviously I went to a divinity school where many, many students were preparing for ordination in the Protestant tradition. And what I noticed was, if the closer you become to the institution and its authority, its central authority, the more and more you have to conform to survive, and the less and less, able you seem to be to speak truth anymore. This is a great irony of, to me, the Catholic churches. They're so brilliant at social justice to the outer world, but the social justice never seems to turn inward. And prophets are always welcome, working with the outside world, but no prophets are allowed inside. And I've noticed that as you get closer and closer to power, that you can't speak out, or you risk losing your job. I think we see this with the Catholic priesthood now. How many priests really want to speak out about the injustice they see on the part of the institution, but they're afraid. They don't want to lose their jobs. They don't want to lose their medical care. They're not marketable. Believe me, as someone with a ministry degree, you're not marketable by and large to the outer world unless you happen to have a MSW or something. And so that has definitely changed and evolved for me. I'm not suggesting that I don't feel some sort of calling to some sort of ordination or priestly ministry, but how I think that should happen has really transformed. For one quick example is I feel like community should call forth their leaders. I don't think I'd feel comfortable going out, getting ordained, and then saying, I'm here. But that's a very radical idea for Catholic people to accept, the idea of choosing your leaders. And so I think that that's still an idea that is, for when I talk to most Catholic communities, pretty far out. But that's one of the changes I've seen. So,
yeah.
There
are any number of very public clerics and even women religious who are out there in the public. They're writing, they're speaking, they're influencing, they're attracting lots of Catholic folk, and some of us know them to be gay or lesbian, but they're not out. How does that hit you? And what might you say to them if you had them in a room together?
Yeah, I will tell you, it is the great agony of my life right now. My life in this work is how many well-known, prominent nuns and priests, and they're prominent in the media and they're prominent in Catholic publications. Who, either, every people know they're gay, or we sense, or whatever it is, and they don't come out. And, they enjoy a lot of privilege for not coming out, a tremendous amount of attention, a tremendous number of publications, things they get to publish. You wouldn't believe, you really can't publish in the Catholic world. NCR is the only publication I know of that will allow an out practicing gay person to write and to be a columnist for them. And it's
that's a pretty skimpy list.
It is very skimpy, and even there's one publisher that everyone knows to be very social justice oriented, told me, you can write for us, but you cannot speak about women's ordination, so this is this is the great ironies, and it pains me so much because it creates shame to me. It creates shame about the gay and lesbian orientation. And, if the world could know the extraordinary ministry that is being done by gay people, celibate or not celibate, it would be transformative if we could all just stand up. It's like what Harvey Milk said. If everyone would come out of the closet, there would be no closets. And I think that's true in the church. But what's painful is the church does so much damage to gay people, and yet some of its greatest ministers are gay. And you get a lot of privilege if you don't come out.
I was at a workshop this past weekend at New Ways, and one of the breakouts was Hillary House and her wife Celestine. Hillary is a trans woman, And she transitioned after she was married, after they had a child together, and her wife has remained with her. It's an incredible, incredible story of faithfulness and beauty. And Hillary, I've gotten to know her a little bit, is really become a hero of mine. Who are some of your queer heroes in your life, in past or present?
Yeah. For me, one of the, and it probably seems very old school, but one of my real heroes is actually Billie Jean King. You know, she came out. In some ways, she was forced out, you know, as a tennis player. But so there was a wonderful documentary on her a couple of years ago on HBO, and she was fighting very hard for women to get prize money in tennis tournaments that were equal to men. And none of the other female tennis players, and the big ones, Chris Everett, you know, did not want to join her in this. No, 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 don't make any waves. No one would be in solidarity with her. And she said, but what do we have to lose? We have nothing. You know, we did, you know, and in some ways I saw an analogy, you know, with the church, with, you know, what do we, you know, the church gives us nothing. I mean, it starves us. What do we have to do? You know, what do we have to lose? All standing up, you know, and fighting. And so she's definitely, when we talk about queer heroes, definitely one of them. And then, of course, I just mentioned Harvey Milk, you know, as with his quote about the closets, and if everyone came out, there would be none. I think that no institution could learn more from that than the Roman Catholic Church. So.
Amen. Has God changed for you? The divine face changed for you with time and experience?
Yeah.
How do you bump into God? What does the divine look like to you? Feel like to you?
I bump into God. You know, I know this will sound cliche, but in the unlikeliest of places. But what seemed unlikely once seems now so much more natural. Because I really do run into God on the edge, on the margins. Because I think that, you know, it's all part of the larger theology I have that you know, if we believe that God is love and God is truth and God is compassion and God is generosity and all of those things, we know how those virtues are so marginalized in our society, in our culture, in our interactions as human beings. So really, God is marginalized. You know, whenever we don't choose love, whenever we don't choose truth, whenever we choose to hide, God actually is marginalized, because that's really God's presence. And you know that if you've really experienced reconciliation, if you've really heard someone speak truth, if you've really experienced love and forgiveness, you know that you get that experience of the holy, like I was speaking about earlier. And when that presence, you know, that love is marginalized, God is too. And so to me, it makes so much sense that I have seen the face of God in the broken places, in the desolate places, in people who live on the edge. You know, when I worked with the homeless most recently, we had an open program where anyone from the street could come in. So people came in various states of drug addiction or alcohol, you know, intoxication, and there were a lot of just hot messes would come through our door all the time. And those were the places I saw Christ the most, you know, was where you wouldn't see it in the broken, in the people stumbling and people in pain, because I said, God, that's exactly what we do to God, you know, is this, you know, I think we cause God agony, you know, because with what we do with love and truth and all those things that Jesus was. So that's where I see God, you know, now, is I'm always seeing God on the edge, you know, not seeing God in the center of power, not seeing God in the authority structure.
Yeah.
So,
Hey, Jamie, Becky, let's. I want to ask anybody who's participating here if they have questions. Now's the time to put them forward, please. And we have one from Becky from St. Louis. Could you speak more to how you've come to understand your calling to ordination?
Sure. I want to say hi, Becky. Becky introduced me at Call to Action this year, so I'm so glad you're here. Thank you for coming. I can explain that more. I find myself in really a crossroads with ordination and with priesthood now. And I think a lot of young women that I've spoken to are at a similar place, where you see that what we know to be the priesthood today certainly does not seem to be the representative of Jesus. Again, going back to what I was saying about moving toward power, the center of power, and all these power structures where you have to make all of these compromises just to be in. I don't know that many, especially feminist women for whom that model of priesthood, the Roman Catholic priesthood that we know today, works. At the same time, I am very well aware that there are so many people who grew up Catholic or for whom Catholic is still home, even though they do not appreciate the institution and they feel unwelcome in the institution, who still long for some sort of sacrament. They need rites of passage. I mean, this is a primitive human need. Baptism and anointing, and everyone I think is entitled to a really good funeral rite, a really good funeral mass, in addition to a really good wedding. And so I see so many people. Some of the people I've walked through RCIA when I was working at the parish have come back. Can you baptize our baby? Can you marry us? Can you do this? It's remarkable. So I want to be that leader for those people. I want to be some sort of priest to people who live on the edge and who deserve, really, really, well done, meaningful rites, and sacraments and counseling and all those things, priests should do. And so I find myself right now at a crossroads of not comfortable still with the models of ordination. I'm seeing even some of the breakaways, look a little bit too much like the old model, but also feeling very much called to feed, people who are coming to me saying, we're hungry for this, and your journeying with us has meant so much to us. I'm just not sure what priesthood should look like. I definitely feel like people should call you forward. So when someone comes to me and said, I remember you from 5 years ago, and you would be the only one I want to baptize your child. That's powerful. That's a calling, and it has to be appreciated as such. Or someone who says, I wish you were our leader at worship, or something like that. That's God's call. God's call comes through other people, So it's a hard thing. I'm definitely in a discernment process of what I understand ordination to look like now, because I definitely long to feed people. People still want someone who's in leadership. And I think God still calls people. God still singles people out with certain gifts to do things. And you have those gifts that people tell you you do. So it's a hard thing, Becky, honestly, and I think I think a lot of young women are in this place too, of not knowing quite what ordination should look like now.
Jim has a question from Indianapolis. Why remain Catholic in the face of fundamental teaching rejection?
I think that I may be part of what's a burgeoning movement. I think a movement that's really blossoming, of people who are saying, they're making a distinction between Roman Catholic and Catholic. And I think by Roman Catholic, folks mean, and none of this has been defined for sure, but this is what I'm hearing. Folks mean the institutional church, where you are, you accept the bishops and the Pope as your authorities, and things like that. Versus something, that's Catholic but not Roman. And I think what folks mean by that is, finding great meaning in that sacramental theology that I was just mentioning. Finding great meaning in the social justice tradition. I mean, I've studied, I've many religions. There is nothing quite like the Catholic social justice teaching. It is unparalleled by any Christian tradition or any other faith. Would that the church again followed it, internalized it, but it's there and it's powerful, and I know people find profound meaning in it, and they should, and rightly they should. These are, I think, some of the aspects of being Catholic that speak to people. So these days, when I say I'm Catholic, what I say is I find great meaning in the sacramental tradition and in the social justice teaching, that those aspects of Catholicism still give meaning. They still, for my life, they help me make meaning, and they still give me a sense of God and language for God that seems right with my experience. In terms of the teaching, I absolutely, reject it. I reject all the church's teachings on sexuality, contraception, all of those things. But that's a much larger issue. But I think what's important to say is when I say I'm Catholic, this is what I'm saying. And I think I'm finding more and more people saying that. People in Dignity, people in breakaway Catholic churches. So it's a really interesting moment to call yourself Catholic.
A question from Delphine. How can we as Catholics move beyond the conversation of gay and lesbian to become fully embracing of bisexual, trans, and queer?
Okay, thank you. Hi, Delphine. I think what you're saying, Delphine, is very important. I think that, as we know, there's a sad, legacy of gay and lesbian people not understanding trans issues, queer issues, bisexual. I think that's kind of how the movement, started. It started with gay rights, lesbian rights. But as we've come to, and I think this is what we need to do, is as we've come to really reflect on our identities, I think and you know this better than I do, Delphine. I read your thoughts on this for information. I think that we've started to realize that identity is so much broader, than orientation. I had the great opportunity to teach a course called Sexual Diversity and Catholicism at Fairfield University in Connecticut, Catholic College in Connecticut last year, and we developed this course, and we couldn't even start to talk about sexual orientation for weeks because there was so much to say about gender and about identity. And as the students explored that, they saw what a remarkable spectrum there is, how complex we are, just from anatomically complex we are. We're not all absolutely male or female. Genetically, there are so many variations of male and female, hormonally. And then you get into the whole idea of, my personal expression, my emotion. And by the time you've looked at all these spectrums of gender and gender identity and anatomical identity, the students say, well, what the heck is orientation? Then it becomes very, very complex. And I think education is really important. I mean, I still talk to so many young, old, middle-aged gay and lesbian people who don't understand gender identity. They don't understand it. And I think once you start to educate people about it, it becomes a lot less scary. It becomes a lot less other. One of the stories I often tell when I talk about gender identity, I talk about my first Holy Communion, where I was forced to wear a dress. And it was like the worst thing. Like, it was the great catastrophe of my childhood, because I, as a child, could not wear a dress. I still can't wear a dress. I still can't wear certain shades. Shades of feminine colors, so to speak, certain kinds of ruffles or frills. I actually physically cannot do it without feeling like I am in drag. So if I'm in women's clothes, I feel like I'm in drag. I often tell that story to open up a conversation, and it doesn't hurt that it's connected with my first Holy Communion. It makes it funny, having to wear this bridal gown and this veil, and that gender identity is a great, great spectrum, and there's so much more going on just with me than being, lesbian. So I think education is important. I think a lot of gay people are afraid of it. They don't understand. They're afraid to offend someone. They see things change. We've all saw Chaz Bono, but how much did we really learn from that? I'm not sure. So I think, Delphine, education is going to be so important to that, and educating the gay and lesbian community.
Jamie, you're connected to Dignity New York, and there's a lot of young people in that group. Can you say a little bit about, off of Jacqueline's question here about the young and their approach to the Catholic Church? When you look at them, when you experience their faith, their shared faith, what do you see vis-a-vis the church?
What I see is, I think a lot of what I've been talking about in terms of what I think is so still rich and meaningful and good about the Catholic tradition. And if you hear most young people, gay or straight, interview young Catholics, and they say, well, what don't you like about the church? They'll often say, I don't like the hierarchical structure. I don't like the ban on women's ordination. I don't like the teaching on homosexuality. And they, what do you like? Well, I love the social justice tradition. I love the community. And I think what they also love, too, is that sacramental tradition, but no one's been able to name that for them just yet. But if you named it for them as God being in the world and being able to encounter God anywhere, I think that would really speak to new generation. I think that just opens it up.
Yes.
And if we could get that message out better, I try, to get that message out, I think would be so life-giving and help people make meaning. So I see that. I really see, a lot of, most young people do not have the needs for the priesthood that we, the model of priesthood we have today, or that I don't even know if the parish really speaks to them. I think, we have such fractured communication as young people, with texting and with tweeting and with all of these things, as helpful as they are. There's not a lot of face-to-face physical presence that we have to one another. And I think young people feel that deprivation, because if you ask them, what do you want out of church? They say, I want to talk. I just want to sit and talk. We always think, oh, they need better liturgy. They need better music. They need better preaching. And it's just not true, I mean, do we all need that? Yes, absolutely. But most young people want something in addition to liturgy. And I believe that so much of the success of the young adults in Dignity, New York, is that they meet beforehand for 2 hours on a Sunday, and they go to the Gay and Lesbian Center and they just talk. Somebody comes up with a topic and they just talk. And then they go to Mass. And I think that the Mass takes on this whole new meaning because they've already had communion with one another. They've already had the real presence of one another. And then after that, typically they'll go to a bar. They'll go to a piano bar and sing show tunes for an hour, which is its own kind of liturgy. And so that's my sense, is that young people really, I think there's potential for some real vision of the early church, that we think so highly of the early church, of small community and shared meals. I think because young people don't have a lot of that medieval trapping or nostalgia for that church, or that those symbols don't necessarily speak to them, that I think there's real potential for small Christian communities, that really, I think, speak to really what Jesus asked us of in the Gospels. So that's really what I see.
We've got time for maybe one more quick question, if anybody has one. And if not, Jamie, if there...
Robert.
Oh, here we go. Robert again from New York. Posed anyone in the biblical tradition that you look to as a role model?
A question I once posed. I mean, I'm going to give the cliche answer of Jesus, and it's because I feel such a deep connection with the Gospels. I actually started out. I didn't mean to be. When I was in college and when I entered divinity school, I went as a scripture scholar, and my expertise was the Gospels. And I felt such a deep, maybe as a writer, I feel connection to narrative, and the Jesus narrative and the Jesus character and how different he is in the four Gospels. One of the best things you can do is read one Gospel from beginning to end, and you watch what your vision of Jesus becomes. It's very, very interesting, and you get four very different portraits of him. But for me, and the reason I will say that it's Jesus is because Jesus was always arguing with the institutional religion. He was always at odds with the religious leaders of his time, who said that God can be here and God can't be here, or you can't heal someone because it's this day or that day. And Jesus just helping us understand that this is, there's a very big difference between religion, and what religion prescribes and what is actually an experience of the holy. That we need to be vessels of God's presence, and not, experts in the law, telling people that they're holy or they're not holy. That this is about God and God's longing to be present to us. And I think that he didn't do that. The best example was inviting everyone to the table. And I brought this up when I talked about Barbara Johnson. this idea of the Eucharist. This is Jesus's table. And Jesus never asked anyone to repent or pursue an orthodoxy code or make a confession of faith before he said, come to my table. You always got invited to the table first. And that's really the sacramental tradition at its best. When you invite people, it can be so transformative. And I saw that at Xavier when I worked at the parish, with these gay men that were wanting to become Catholics. When you invite, the life that the sacrament can take on just by inviting people. And so that's why, for me, Jesus is the role model.
Mm-hmm.
My pleasure.
Jamie, thank you so much.
You,
I really
Jim
appreciate your
Jamie
witness
for this
to
conversation that
to
was
me and to us.
enlightening
And you
and
really do
provocative
give us
and
give us
really
hope
sacred.
from
And to
your
everybody
spot on the
who
margin. So
participated
thank
and
you for
enlivened
being there,
the
and thank
discussion
you
with
for
your comments.
being
I'm sorry we
with
couldn't
us
get to
tonight.
all the
Thank you so
questions.
much, everyone.